Welcome everybody to our book talk. I'm Stephanie Johnson, your facilitator. My pronouns are she and her, and we're here with Alexander Monea, the author of The Digital Closet, How the Internet Became Straight. So we are the Ontario Digital Literacy and Access Network. We are a nonprofit organization that works to remove digital literacy and access barriers for us LGBTQIA+ people and communities. And we create resources, we host training sessions, and we conduct research to work towards a more equitable online experience for us LGBTQIA+ people. So just a brief land acknowledgement. We recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories where ODLAN's volunteers and partners are located, and we acknowledge our presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area where we primarily work, known as Tekaronto, has been cared for by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon, One Plum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peacefully share and care for the Great Lakes region. If you aren't sure what land you're located on, you can go to nativeland.ca, which will give you a map of all the different territories across North America. So as I mentioned, I'm Stephanie Johnson. I'm the executive director of ODLAN, and we're here today with Alexander Monea. Alex, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hey, everybody. I'm Alex. I use he, him pronouns. I'm an associate professor of English and Cultural Studies at George Mason University, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. I've been there for about 8 years, and I do research on the cultural impact of computing in internet studies, algorithm studies, software studies, in areas like that, and also work in fairness, accountability, transparency, and ethics. And the book we're talking about today is my first monograph, my first solo authored monograph, and I'm really excited to share more of the info in it with you all.
Yeah, I have the book, so I'm really excited to talk about it. When I found this, it was because my research, I'm also a PhD candidate at York University, so my research focuses on us LGBTQIA+ older adults' experiences with the digital divide. And this was one of the only texts that I found that looks at the internet through like gender diversity and sexual expression, and how the challenges that we face as a community are quite unique. So I'm really excited to talk about it. Tell us more about your research and how the book came about.
So this book has a very weird origin story, in the sense that I don't think I ever really set out to write it. It just kind of happened. Before I was working on this book project, a lot of my research was focused on natural language processing and sort of semantic biases. And so this was basically about ChatGPT before ChatGPT. And unsurprisingly, before ChatGPT, this was not very popular. So it was really hard to get people interested in this, particularly because there weren't very strong visual components to it. It's very hard for people to imagine a database of language. And so some friends invited me to join a visual studies panel at the Society for Cinema and Media Studies, actually in Toronto. And they were all working on vision algorithms, animation algorithms, computer graphics, things like that. And so I was looking for an application that was similar to natural language processing so that I could sort of hit the ground running. And computer vision was an easy sort of comparison to make. And so I jumped to that. And I was trying to think of an algorithm in computer vision that worked really well. And most of the ones that I'd read about in the newspapers and in like tech industry magazines were sort of catastrophic failures, right? So you'd read about Teslas that run into the back of semis, or warehouse algorithms that can't tell the difference between like a banana and a school bus. And the only one that I could think of that worked reasonably well was the adult content filters that had been spread across the internet. If you're older, like I am, you'll probably remember an era where if you went to Google Images and you searched just about anything and you scrolled down, you would eventually get pornography. And around 2012, all of that changed. Uh, it really, the amount of pornography that appeared in Google search results drastically lowered. And so I decided to start looking at that. And when I started looking at the algorithms that powered Google's capacity to automatically detect and take down pornographic imagery and video, I just started finding bias after bias. Right. So the data sets were biased, the parameters that they were trained with were biased, their implementation and sort of adjudication measures were biased. And so I tried to write it up as an article. And then as people read the article and gave feedback on it, it just kept growing and growing and growing, and to the point where it was a small book. And then I talked to MIT about it and they wanted it. And through their feedback, it grew into a full-size book. I think at each stage of that process, I was really more just trying to get the word out as fast as I could, because I saw sort of scattershot articles about the impact that this was having on queer content creators across the internet, but there was no real systemic study of this, especially from a like peer-reviewed and respected outlet that you could sort of hold up in a meeting with Silicon Valley executives. And so the goal was really to try to like get the word out as fast as possible, but also get something with like institutional legitimacy that you could use as a sort of argumentative point in negotiations with these companies. Uh, I spent time trying to get the reporters to cover it. I couldn't get that to happen. The article version took longer to come out than the book, which is another weird story and indicative of, I think, a lot of the ways that academia works. But yeah, it was kind of something that just came out of left field and took over my life, and just grew and grew and grew, and I couldn't really put it down. I kind of got obsessed with it, and then all of a sudden there was a book.
That is such an amazing like story. I know I've heard it before, but I haven't heard it in this much depth. So it's really interesting how these unexpected things come about as researchers and how we kind of fall into these holes of curiosity. Um, can you tell us more about the research process? Like I know chapter 2, straight code, really goes into the rigorous um, research process that you use, but I'd love to hear how that went for you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so for those that haven't read the book, it's broken up into 4 chapters and an intro and a conclusion. The introduction really sort of lays out the problem and tries to define some of the key concepts. The first chapter looks at the culture around Silicon Valley that creates the deep need to censor pornography, and in so doing, throw the baby out with the bathwater and censor a lot of artistic content, censor queer content. So it's sort of showing the cultural shifts that make something like that possible, that are trickling into the everyday operations at a social media company like Meta, for instance. The second chapter is much more interested in the sort of nuts and bolts of how that works at companies, and has really close investigations, in particular of Google and Meta, and looks at the ways that their algorithms that automatically flag and delete content have inherent heteronormative biases, and then looks at the company policies and the way that they get made and the way that they get implemented, often by offshore content moderators in India and the Philippines, and the sort of biases that go into making and enforcing those policies by what Meta calls in internal documents its human algorithms. And then the third chapter really drives down into what this does to non-pornographic content from the queer community online, and shows a whole host of content ranging from artistic expression, advertisements, community organizing, event spaces, all this sort of stuff that's just getting unduly censored online because of the heteronormative biases in the way that these policies are made and enforced both by humans and algorithms. And then the last chapter looks at what this is actually doing to pornographic content online as it bottlenecks it into very small spaces that are much more easily controlled by highly integrated and endowed like heteronormative porn companies. And then the end of it kind of looks at sort of future directions that we could go in to try to change this. And I say all that because the methodologies kind of switch up between some of the chapters. Different chapters call for different things. So the second chapter, looking at the sort of culture around Silicon Valley, requires reading a lot of gross material that kind of makes you want to wash your brain, right? As you sort of see key talking points from Christian conservatives and the alt-right sort of trickle into Silicon Valley and show up even in like boardroom meetings or in sort of the everyday workforce that's operating there. And there's certain like dog whistles that you can trace directly back to that. And then other times it's sort of watered down, right, through intermediaries like Jordan Peterson is a big intermediary between the like extreme like far right misogynists online and sort of everyday Silicon Valley labor forces. The second chapter is interesting because you're trying to get a window into algorithms that you can't see. And so you kind of have to scrape together the best representation of them that you can to do the best analysis that's possible as an outsider, right? There was no way that Meta or Google was going to give me access to their algorithms and the instances where they had false positive flags in the past. It would just be, I mean, too damaging for the company, right, to hand that out to a researcher for free. And so I had to look for publicly available versions of their algorithms that they would publish in sort of computer science conference proceedings. And then you would also look for public-facing data sets that were sort of the bedrock of some of the internal data sets that they would create. These are things like ImageNet and WordNet that are sort of industry benchmarks and run out of US private universities and have become sort of standards in Silicon Valley. And then some of it's just like using developer tools to test the algorithms and see sort of what they're flagging and when and why and try to figure out the reasoning behind it. So the second one is really employing a mixed bag of methods to try to build a window into something that's intentionally opaque from everyday internet users. And then lastly, I'd say that the third and fourth chapters that sort of look at the broad impact that that's having on the internet were really hard to write because there's no one keeping track, right? There's no one keeping score of this stuff, and the archive is ephemeral. Even since writing the book, if you go back and look for some of the examples that I'm citing in the book, they're gone now, right? People have deleted their tweets, have made their accounts private. Some of the like fringe newspapers and magazines that covered them have folded or changed their URL structures, right? And the links are broken. And so like trying to string together an archive of instances where queer content was censored was particularly difficult, right? And I think many of us probably have experiences similar to this, right? You've probably seen content online getting taken down and seen a creator complaining about it. But if you had to go back and find evidence of it, right, like you'd only have a hazy memory because you probably didn't screenshot it and bookmark it and write notes about it in the instant that you saw it. And so trying to string together a big enough archive of that to make a convincing case was really challenging. And because it's so ephemeral at this point, it has to be a very strongly qualitative archive, which I think makes it at times harder to convince people in tech of exactly the scale and severity of what's going on.
It was a really in-depth, like, explanation of the process of the book and the methodologies used. So that's amazing. Can you give us examples of content moderation?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it happens all the time, right? And it's uh, often done with good intentions, but it is undervalued at a lot of companies and not invested in enough to be done well, right? So content moderation is really just taking the stuff off of the platform that most people don't want to see and that would ruin their experience. And in some categories, this is really good, right? We don't want a platform that has so much hate speech on it that it drives marginalized people off of the platform and sort of silences their voices and monotonizes the content on the platform. You probably don't want to see gross violence every day on your platform. And so there's teams of people that come up with policies for when it is allowed and when you've crossed a line and it needs to be taken down. There are algorithms that they try to train to automatically detect that because there are hundreds of millions, if not billions, of pieces of content being posted to these platforms every day. And so there are algorithms being trained to automate the detection and deletion of the offending content. And then there are human content moderators that, when people flag stuff through the community flagging feature, or when algorithms flag stuff but aren't quite sure, it gets kicked up to human moderators. Some of them are precariously employed in the US. Most of them are precariously employed in India and the Philippines or other English-speaking countries. This is expanding for other sort of linguistic and cultural groups online, but it's still predominantly English language workforce. And they're in charge of sort of making the final determinations. After that, there's pretty limited adjudication mechanisms to sort of change their mind. Uh, and in the instances of things like hate speech or like gross violence, having those taken off a platform can make it a more inviting space. But when they try to manage adult content, it becomes tricky, right? Many of the advertisers that are paying to keep these platforms running are incredibly conservative and terrified of the idea that their advertisements might appear alongside pornographic search results. And because of that, they exert a very strong lobbying influence on these social media companies to crack down on pornography and make sure that it never appears on their platforms. And the problem with that is that making distinctions between art and pornography, content about pornography and pornography, queer content and pornography often leads to gray areas that algorithms and people that are paid 7 cents an hour and are reviewing thousands of pieces of content in a day aren't particularly well equipped to navigate those gray areas. And because they're so concerned about pornography slipping through, they are hypersensitive about it. They'd rather have 1,000 pieces of queer content get unduly censored than have one piece of pornography slip through the filters and show up next to search results, because that could damage their revenues. So content moderation is really about controlling what is visible on a platform and making that platform palatable for advertisers so that they will pay to place ads on that platform. In many instances, it can also make communities safer and stronger if it's done right, but it's often not very well invested in, and it's not particularly well equipped to handle the gray areas around distinguishing between adult content and safe for work or regular content. And because it's ill-equipped to do that, but has a very motivated interest in doing so at a conservative level, it has a lot of false positives and ends up flagging a lot of queer content and artistic content just because it's worried that it might be pornographic.
The Italian and French filmmakers must be pretty upset with their like erotics and they'll get filtered.
Oh yeah, I mean, there were really funny instances during the pandemic where I think it was a museum in Vienna started it, but they had to create an OnlyFans account to share pictures of their oil portraits because their account was getting banned on Instagram and on Facebook. Uh, because the, nude oil portraits from 500 years ago were too saucy for 21st century algorithms.
Well, that's a corporate partnership I've never heard before. I can imagine that meeting.
Oh, that's really funny. There's a lot of little tidbits like that, I think. Yeah, can you tell us more about some of the examples of content creators and the censorship that they're experiencing?
Yeah, I mean, so you can look at it from I think two perspectives. You can look at it from like categories of content that are really getting banned, or you can look at personal stories from content creators to sort of get a window into what this looks like. For categories, it's really interesting because sometimes it's so blatant that it's hard to imagine that people weren't aware of this problem. Uh, so for instance, Instagram or uh, Google from 2012 to 2015 just banned the word bisexual from search results. It thought any use of the term bisexual was pornographic, and it took them 3 years to figure out that there was other usages for the term. Right now, TikTok has multiple times shadow banned the term intersex. And every time that it happens, people tell them about it and they say, whoopsie, we didn't mean to do that, and then try to fix it. There's a lot of instances of gaslighting like this where people will point out even the most extreme versions of this, and then they'll get a whoopsie, we didn't mean to do that, and then a temporary fix. And I mean, Instagram does this. It has lots of hard bans and shadow bans on content around like curvy, around bisexual, around even just the word women has been shadow banned before because it's worried that these whole categories of content only indicate pornography, right? And so there's a lot of instances of category collapse where it just assumes that the pornographic usage of a term is the only usage of it and hard bans it across platforms. It also has there are also sort of secret versions of this, like shadow banning, where terms seem searchable, or you can still apply the tag to your content, but when you actually go into the app, like if you go into Instagram and search for a particular hashtag, no results will come up. Or if someone's searching for other content with that tag won't show up in search results. So it's kind of like leaving people to scream into the void, right? Like they can post content, but no one's going to see it and it's not going to be discoverable. And then the third version of it is demonetization, where your content is still on the platform, but you can't make money from it, the platform won't serve ads alongside it. And so you can see lots of whole content categories like this. The other really terrible one is transgender videos on YouTube. Everything just from transgender content creators talking about not even trans issues, to anyone talking about hormone therapy and transitioning has had problems with the platform, particularly on restricted mode, which is supposed to make YouTube more family friendly or safe. It's an option that you can put on in your household, in libraries, in schools that restricts what videos show up. But then when you start looking at individual content creators, the way that this impacts them is really wild. So for instance, one person that I did an interview with and spent a lot of time reviewing their content was an Australian woman named Neon Fiona, who ran a vlog for a long time and was basically just talking about her everyday life, but that included her bisexuality. And so she had videos about her dates with men, videos about her dates with women, and then videos eventually about her engagement and marriage to a woman. And if you look on her platform, you can toggle on restricted mode, which means that it's safe for people under 18 or safe to be consumed in a library or a public school. And all the videos about her having a girlfriend start to disappear, and all the videos about her having a boyfriend stay there, right? So I can sort of toggle her sexuality with one little switch that YouTube gives me. And there was a whole spate of people that noticed this starting in around 2017, 2018, where their sexuality got hidden as soon as they toggled on restricted mode on YouTube. And many of them had their videos demonetized. And so for people that are trying to become influencers or make a career off of their sort of internet posting, it's really damaging to have this happen, right? If you're shadow banned, you drop out of search results, you're not discoverable. If you're demonetized, you can't even make money from the content that you spent, invested time, labor, and sometimes money into creating. And if you start looking at influencer cycles, even not being like a top creator for 2 or 3 days can damage your reputation in a way that takes months to recover from. So these shadow bans, demonetizations, deplatformings have very real impacts on these communities, and they're not evenly distributed, right? If you're fat, queer, a person of color, disabled, right? The more marginalized intersections you start to occupy, the more likely this is to happen to you, and the more precarity you face for having sort of your finances frozen and your communication outlets invisibilized.
I'm just concerned about this adjudication process because it's so subjective and so few people, like banning the word bisexuality for everyone, right? Like that power is like insane as a technocrat. And I just feel like it's like the risk of it being in improper hands such that, the opposite to creation is totalitarianism, right? And like fascism and whatnot. And like as the world, no one can predict the future. It's like these things create groupthink and are altered to creation or altered to art. It's like, even like, I think you wrote in your book about how people are using like satire and sarcasm to like, to say, oh, like whatever. So that puts the risk at the art of comedy, right? Which is like such an amazing, like, I guess maybe my question is more like, can you speak about like that adjudication process? Is it getting worse? Is it getting better? Like, whoopsie, we like gaslighting stuff is bad because it is seriously impacting people. Like, so yeah, that's kind of my question about just how do we make sure that these very subjective, few biased people don't create, get rid of the arts.
Yeah, thanks, Sonia. I mean, I'd say from my perspective, and this is why I do bad in consulting gigs, these companies already are in very bad hands, right? It certainly could be worse, right? Like a literal Nazi could control it, right? But like having a company in Mark Zuckerberg's hands is not safe for queer community, and is not safe for most everyday users. People that are driven wholly by neoliberal logics and have majority ownership stakes in companies that have billions of users really have undue influences, and their biases show up and impact their user communities in ways that are really profound. So, I mean, maybe this is foreshadowing the end, but like, I don't think that like allowing a billionaire owner class to control like social infrastructures is really a functional way to move forward or to ensure sort of the type of internet that we could all dream about for sort of future generations. As far as the adjudication mechanisms, I mean, the short version is like they were bad, they got like slightly better, and now they're bad again. So like for instance,
How long did it take to ban bisexuality? Like, was this like
so it happened around 2012. People started noticing it, and it took 3 years of people protesting against it and like notifying them before they created a fix for it. Other examples are worse. So if you follow like for instance, tech news around image recognition. In 2015, Google Photos mislabeled a Black software developer and his girlfriend as gorillas, and Google apologized, removed the Google Photos' ability to identify Black people and any type of primate, and said that they would fix it immediately. And it's now been 9 years, and you still can't identify a chimpanzee or a gorilla or a Black person with Google Photos or Google's vision recognition software. They've managed to find ways to bend glass in half since then, but they can't figure out how to make an image recognition tell the difference between Black humans, right? And so there's tons and tons of examples of this where sort of this stuff gets pointed out and these companies apologize profusely, and then the news cycle changes and then they stop focusing on it. I mean, YouTube, for instance, made public apologies about demonetizing and shadow banning trans content creators in 2017 and 2018. If you follow up with them today, they're still experiencing the same things. If I look at Neon Fiona's video page today, I can still toggle her sexuality. I mean, these companies gaslight people, but really it's a feat, to use like Lisa Nakamura said this, and I really love it, that they're playing it off like it's a bug in the system, but it's a feature of the system, right? Like the sort of oppression of marginalized people is a feature of systems that learn the sum average of human behavior and then reinforce it. As far as like the nuts and bolts of the adjudication mechanisms, they don't work super well. So in 2017 and 2018, when these trans content creators were having their videos taken down, to even appeal a video being taken down, you had to have 10,000 views of the video within the past, it was either 90 days or 30 days. If a video had fewer views than that, it was not available to, you could not appeal any decisions that were made about the video. So it's already bracketed for people that are big time YouTube creators and have sort of the money and power on the platform to be heard. Anyone that was smaller scale couldn't appeal these sorts of decisions. Other companies have similarly vague and difficult appeals policies, and most often the appeals only are successful if you can get a journalist interested in your case and either threaten to write about it or write about it. So for instance, there was a wealthy man who posted a TikTok of him and his, I think it was his boyfriend, kissing on New Year's Eve, and TikTok took it down. But he knew high-powered lawyers and New York Times writers and managed to like make it a story, and TikTok put his video back up. But that's sort of the level of influence and access that you kind of have to get these decisions overturned with any sort of regular success. Most people can't even get in touch with the company, let alone get them to actually overturn the decision, at least in the people that I've spoken to or the examples that I've been able to read about. And I think that's part of the problem of like the false positives, right? Like there's so many of them and there's really no recourse for it in most instances after the content gets taken down.
With the rise of anti-2S LGBTQI plus hate that we're seeing now, how is the fire being fueled by these social media companies? And it kind of feels like they want to see it happen because it's increasing engagement. I know negative content tends to get more engagement than positive content. So I just want to know if you could speak on that a bit, and then we'll go into the Q&A period for everyone else to ask their questions.
I mean, some of that is stuff, Stephanie, that more like I suspect than I can say for certain, right? Whether or not their boardrooms and executives see anti-trans content, for instance, as a cash cow, like explicitly, their algorithms do, right? Because it generates strong emotional reactions. It's very viral. Lies spread faster than truths across all social media. And so these are sort of like issues that are designed to fuel the platform algorithms that power these sort of like ad sales companies. And so I do think that this is exactly the type of content that can go viral. And it's really problematic when we don't have built-in protections for it, right? When you start looking at the protections that different social media platforms have built in for their queer communities, they're slight at best. And even in cases where they're relatively strong, I'm thinking here of like, for instance, Meta has relatively strong policies around hate speech, around sexuality, gender identity, things like that. But even there, their oversight board just this past year found that they don't implement them with any sort of rigor, right? Like they don't live up to the mission statement that they release to the public when you look into the nuts and bolts of how they're actually uh, 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 moderating content that is anti-trans, for instance. This was a case about a Polish post that basically was encouraging like trans death, right? But it was done subtly, and so it was allowed to stay on the platform. And then the oversight board, which is an independent group of scholars, industry insiders, and other people that have a lot to say about how social media is operating, examine cases of content moderation on Facebook, and then release recommendations that Facebook is bound to reply to, though not implement. And so even they found that Facebook wasn't living up to its own standards. So these companies don't have strong standards in many cases to begin with for protecting queer users on their spaces. Even when they do, that doesn't often translate into like actual protections in the way that content is moderated. And so, you know, this sort of highly viral, inflammatory, and often like misinformation filled anti-trans content in particular spreads virally across these platforms. So I don't think it's a very like good recipe for queer rights moving forward, to have platforms that have loose policies that don't implement them very fully and that are sort of salivating at the money they can make off of sort of viral alt-right, far-right, and anti-LGBTQ content. And I mean, I just did an article update of the book, and so I was looking at like ODLAN's reports, but also reports from like GLAAD and ADL and stuff like this, and the numbers really don't look good most places, right? The number of queer people that are facing harassment on an everyday basis online is up in the US and in Canada. The severity of that harassment seems to be up. The sort of company's response to it seems to be like average to poor at best across the board. So there's definitely a sort of anti-queer cultural movement that is gaining steam on social media, and there aren't a lot of like barriers or safety mechanisms to protect queer people online.
It's really freaky, to be honest. So I want to open the floor to folks to answer questions. I am going to pause the recording and restart it 5 minutes to 1. So I want to thank our sponsor, QP3903. And you can follow us on our social media channels. We have almost all of them. So find us on Facebook, Twitter, now known as X, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Feel free to get in touch with us. And Alex, would you be okay if folks did want to get in touch with you if they reached out to us and we connected them?
Yeah, I was just putting that in the chat. They can also do it directly, right? Like my email address
Okay.
isn't find. I'm on social media.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Alex, for coming to this, agreeing to do this book talk. Again, love your work, and I look forward to seeing what we can do together in moving forward.
Thanks, everyone. It was really great to spend some time with you all.